Alrighty guys, working on the 504 again today. Got the cylinder head sitting on there. I got the bolts run down in, and I got them torqued up to the first two settings. I usually torque them, and they recommended also to torque in 3 settings. Like I went to 30 foot-pounds first, and then to 60 foot-pounds, and now I'm going to put my 1/2 inch torque wrench on it and go to about 85. They recommend 80 to 90 foot-pounds torque in the book. I don't know why they do that. It pisses me off when they give you a range. Caterpillar's real bad about that. They'll give you a range of like 10 or 15 foot-pounds on bigger bolts, and it's still a couple on the smaller bolts. Just pick a freaking number and go with it. But whatever, so I'm going to split it, and I usually do on any of them. When they give me a range, I just split it and go right in the middle. So I'm going to go to 85 foot-pounds. Yeah, and then I always just, if it obviously tells me which way to the torque pattern, which is just like that, and you just go around to all that, and then over to that one there's 14 head bolts. And if you don't have a torque pattern, or the book, which they're probably going to give one, but just FYI, you always start in the middle and work out, and you just go around and around is what you're wanting to do, and that'll stretch the head evenly and smash it out when it goes to the, when it torques it out, and you have less of a chance of cracking the head as it heats up and cools and everything. So that's what we're gonna do. And I just turn the engine like this because it's real easy to see. You know, they want one, is it, you know, it just matches up with the book. Come on, there we go. Always getting nervous. These bolts, and someone knows, if someone out there knows the reason, tell me. These bolts got 4 hash marks, which would be in between a grade 5 and a grade 8 bolt. So explain to me what that's supposed to mean. You know, if one of you guys knows out there in YouTube land. I could not. And they didn't say anything about it in the book. And I'd never seen that before. Got 4 hash marks instead of 3 or 6 like a grade 5 and a grade 8 would have. You'll notice here I'm just going around and around. I'm not too bad at memorizing torque patterns, so. And once you've done it, and once you know what you're doing, you know, I mean, if you know the principle behind it, what they're trying to do, it's not hard to do. And then they want you to torque it up again after you've run the engine and warmed it up. Then go ahead and torque it when it's hot. So I'll have to, when I get it out and start breaking it in, I'll have to pull the valve cover and the valve train back off of it and do that. Alright, there's the first go around, and I always just hit them again, just because sometimes you might have 1 or 2 of them that moves just a little bit. Like that one there moved just a skosh. These are all going to move just a little bit. And since I got a couple of them that are moving, I'll go back through it and probably hit them one more time to where I can get them to where none of them will move. I'll hit those one more time. Alright, head's all torqued, got the valve train sitting up there, got the push rods in it. I always put a little grease on each end of the push rods, and I always roll them across a flat surface too to make sure they're you know, not bent or anything. Usually you can see if they're bent. I mean, if they do have a little flex, and if they bend, they really bend. So that's usually not too much of an issue to determine. Setting the valves. They say to set them when they're hot, but I've got to set them initially which is what I'll set them to. They call for 20 thousandths on the exhaust and 14 thousandths on the intake, and that just varies per engine. Sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're different. But so I'll have to set them and then reset them again when I retorque the head when the engine's hot after I run it a little bit. But I always put a little oil right in here, also just to make this thing slide easier, and you can kind of get more of an even feel on what it's supposed to be at. I've set the first one here. Sometimes they tell you in the book which valves you can go ahead and set on the inline, or you can set, you only turn the engine over twice instead of turning it over for each cylinder. Right now I've got it on top dead center number 1, and I can set valves 1, 2, 3, and 5, and then I'll roll the engine 100 or 360 degrees once all the way over, so number 4 is on top dead center, and then I can set the other 4 of them. I could stand here and tell you all day how much drag you're supposed to have on the feeler gauge, but until you actually do it, you're never gonna know. That's kind of the reason I don't like setting valves, is just because there's no exact, you're just going off a feel, and every time you set them it's a little different, but that's the way it is. These ones ain't too bad. They're sometimes like that first try after I tighten the jam nut up, even it was right where I needed it to be. Sometimes you never can get them where they need to be, and other times after you tighten the jam nut up, it messes, it either tightens them down more or loosens them up or something, and you just can't seem to win with them. Like there, tighten that one up, tighten that jam nut up, and I think it pulled up on the bolt just a little bit, and do just a smidge more with it. That ain't too bad there. Then you just snug the jam nut up, and there's that one. Let's see, we got exhaust, intake, and then exhaust again, so. Best valve setup I ever saw for setting valves is like on a Ford Genesis tractor from the 90s, like an 8970 or 8670, like Jeff Raymond has. He's got an 8670. I think that's there, it's an 8770. Sorry, Jeff, I got that wrong there. Best setup, I had that 456 Genesis motor, which is a updated version of the original Ford 6 cylinders, and those things, they just had that, they didn't have a jam nut, they just had this threaded screw that ran down through, and it had a hex head on it, and you'd tighten it up, and they had this crushed where it was like a lock nut, and it turned hard, but you never had to set a jam nut. So once you found your right drag on it, you just let go of it, and away it went. You never had to try tighten up the jam nut and hope it doesn't move or anything. But this one's going pretty smooth here, so that's about how you set the valves. I got to set that one, then I'll roll it over. I already got that all checked, got them all set, and then I rolled the engine over and checked them again, and some of them just kind of need to get seated down in the push rods and whatnot, so I had to reset a few of them. And I've done that, so I'm about to roll it over for a third time, and I've done the final check on these first 3 and this one, and they're good now. We're gonna go one over here. that to where it crankshaft's about down like that. And you'll notice now all of a sudden these two valves are in valve overlap and these two are loose because they're in, that's a compression stroke on number 4. Diesels, especially, or turbo diesels, you can't tell as much on valve overlap. These might, for a degree or two in there, could be loose. They won't be loose all the way. But on a turbo engine, you have a lot less valve overlap because the turbo is going to shove the exhaust out and push fresh air in, as on a gas or any naturally aspirated engine, they kind of do something called scavenging, where the valves are open longer and it kind of just got a better airflow right on through the head there to do that. I think that's kind of where the ram air effect on like non-performance cars, they'll run that big tall exhaust manifold to try to do something, get the exhaust cleaned out and kind of get more rammed in there. That one's good. That one's good. That one's good. And that one's good, so. Well, the valves are set. And we'll put the valve cover back on. Let's see. I think that's it for it. Yeah, I could put the valve cover on it. That cleaned the manifold up. Dang thing rusted in the guy's shed this past summer. And I got to try to figure out how all the accessories go on the engine and whatnot. So, thanks for watching. One other thing I forgot to add here. You go and put the valve cover gasket, or put the valve cover on. It's got a cork gasket sitting there. You only tighten those things. I probably only tighten these bolts to, like, you're supposed to torque these valve cover bolts, or that fine thread 3/8 bolt would go to 30 foot-pounds on a grade 5, but I'll probably only go to like 10 or 15, and the reason being, just those cheap tin valve covers, they bend and they'll deform, and that cork gaskets never seal up that well anyways, especially if you tighten them too tight. It just kind of smashes them out. So I'm probably just I just won't tighten it that tight. It's got a good surface on, come on, there we go. It's got the good surface on. Just clean it up good, and you know, as long as your valve cover's not bent or anything from being too tight before, it won't leak. But you just kind of snug them down, which you always hate valve cover stuff. Caterpillar's got pretty good valve covers, or at least on the 3208s, they're a cast aluminum deal, and you can kind of tighten them down a little more. But they just use a rubber gasket, which will also squish out. So I know Cummins, if you torque them down like on an 855 or something, they got a cork gasket, and you gotta like just torque them to like 12 foot-pounds. You just gotta keep going around and around on the bolts until they don't squish anymore to get a nice even torque, or they will leak. You don't like the L10 or the M11 like we got in our Versatile. They're a little better because they got little metal spacers in there where you can only you just tighten it down tight against that metal spacer on the bolt there, and it can't go any farther, which is pretty nice. And I don't ever see one of them that's leaking. So, a little tidbit of information there. So thanks for watching.